I'm Henry Covert, and this is Deep Images. And with me today are Tim Tolbert, executive producer, Keith Howell, panel moderator and co-host, and the great CF Roberts, featured panelist, because we're waiting on the other panelists. Right
Yep.
now, you're it, baby. So, but we're all panelists. So
No
we're
problem.
continuing where we were before with Cult TV. And we've got a whole bunch of other choices today. I'm not going to do the whole redefinition of what cult TV is, but just briefly, it's just something that's not excruciatingly mainstream. Something has its own niche, has its own flavor, may mean different things to different people. Your mileage will vary. You can watch part one of this series where I kind of give an exhaustive and maybe exhausting, probably to everyone watching it, definition of this. So today we're going to start with the man Keith Howell, and he's going to be bringing us a longtime favorite that is really an icon of cult TV.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna be introducing the subject matter of the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker. It is a show that has was not particularly successful as a TV series when it first aired. It kind of started strong and ran out of steam real fast in terms of ratings. This would have been in the early to mid 70s. But its genesis was with the TV movie The Night Stalker that broke all the ratings records. So of course the network wanted to do more with it. My experience with Night Stalker, I was living in Puerto Rico at the time, so Night Stalker and then the sequel TV movie The Night Strangler, both of those I saw them first in the movie theater rather than on television because of the way it worked in Puerto Rico at the time. We've got like the European cuts that they would do sometimes for TV movies. They would cut them for theatrical release in Europe, and so we would get those in our movie theater. So that was kind of cool that I got to experience those as films rather than TV movies. But I was very excited as as a 9-year-old, I guess, when this show came on, and so I was there watching it at the time. Totally confused why it didn't come back for a second season. Now I understand ratings and all that kind of stuff, but it was huge for me. I was a little horror kid. I liked the Universal monsters and I was into that stuff to whatever degree you can be, at 7, 8, 9 years old. But Kolchak just really resonated with, there was just something so cool about it. And what I've said to people before, part of why I think the TV series resonates with those that it does resonate with, which is probably more now than at the time, is that there's an authenticity, a reality that the star Darren McGavin brings to the character of Kolchak, in that he allows his character to be afraid, to be terrified, even though he's the protagonist, the hero of the story. He's also petrified half the time, and he's always searching for the truth, which is partly why I think the show has gained in notoriety over time, is that persistent drive for the truth. But also I think the character resonates because he's somebody who pushes through his own fear and does what needs to be done. And I think there's just something really heroic about that. If Superman, I mean, we like our superheroes and that sort of thing, but there is really something about a guy who has mortality facing him and is petrified and just wants to run away, but stays there and does and stands up to the monster and throws that cross up in front of him or whatever. And so I think that's part of why it resonates. So the show itself, uh, most people are aware of it now because it has grown in such notoriety over the decades and impacted so many shows, like most notably the the X-Files. Um, it just centers around a seersucker suited reporter, kind of in the twilight years of his career, working for a syndicated news organization that's sending out stories basically for syndication to different newspapers at the time. And he finds himself a monster magnet. He's constantly being drawn into these situations that have bizarre monsters. The first one, of course, in the TV movie, The Night Stalker, being a vampire. And so, yeah, the show is a Monster of the Week format. They set it up a little differently than the TV movies, because they had to have sort of a recurring cast of people to interact with and stuff. So they set him up with a cast that surrounded him in the office there. Most notably, of course, his boss, who's is always yelling at him. He's mad at Carl, but they obviously have a mutual love for each other while they're professing hate for each other, and have a long history together. And if you take the TV movies as part of the same continuity, then yeah, his boss constantly is bringing him along, and so you can kind of look at it and see that even when he moves from one paper to another, or from one news service to another, nobody else is going to hire Carl, but they got history, so he brings Carl along. He's always threatening to fire him, but he doesn't. He always pisses off the police. They don't like it, like his manner of butting in and asking questions they don't want to answer. So yeah, it really, it was a game changer, I think, in terms of getting bringing a modern perspective to the standard monsters. But the problem with doing it as a monster of the week, they kind of ran out of monsters.
Right.
With the entire series is only 20 episodes, and by the end they've run out of monsters, and I think that's where the X-Files took the I don't know, the premise, in a sense, of Monster of the Week, and figured out how to do it. You create a little bit of an ongoing storyline. In the early days, now we're used to that in stories, but at the time you didn't really do that. In the 70s, it had to be episodic, and Twilight Zone sort of like helped, I think, massage us towards this feeling that we could have Monster of the Week, but sometimes we've got a larger arcing story that we're also moving towards, that keeps the narrative flowing, and so you can break the format occasionally, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Carl is he's charming, he's smart, he's funny. He also can be dickish. He can be rude. He can be surly. He can use other people to get his way. He will lie to get to the truth. You
But
know.
enough about me.
Yeah. But I just think that I think he resonates because we can all relate to that. It's probably, yeah, it's Darren McGavin. Other than A Christmas Story, this is his tour de force. He played Mike Hammer on television before that, which was a great part for him as well. But this is really, I think, more him. When I was doing research on this a while back, when I was watching the Blu-ray through and listening to the commentaries and all that, I found out that, yeah, a lot of the behind the scenes struggles on this show had to do with Darren McGavin kind of pushing against what they were doing and trying to get them to do more with it. The whole seersucker suit and all that kind of stuff, that's not in the written part of the character. That all
The
was,
Jeff Rice character.
yeah, that was stuff that McGavin brought to it. He brought
Oh,
that
okay.
physicalness to it. And and they made that basically his super suit. And that way they could also film the location shots outside, and they could fit him in any episode, because he's always
Right.
dressed the same way, like a superhero, right?
Right.
And so, when you're working low budget, there are things you can do, but it made an indelible visual style that everyone knows and remembers, right? That's what they think of when they think of Carl Kolchak. And, I remember I read, I think I've got time. I read an analysis on him where they ran the numbers to kind of like figure out his the character's age and what he might have gone through and everything. And at that point in his career, yeah, he would have been heading towards retirement already by this point. And and felt like this is a character choice as well, to get across the idea that he is a guy who's kind of at the end of his rope and his career wise. And this seersucker suit is basically, it's what he wore 30 years ago. Man, why not keep on wearing it? I already got it, kind of a feeling. It's like he probably got it in a thrift store. That
Right.
sounds very Kolchak-ish, right? The hat has become iconic. You can see that hat back there.
Oh yeah.
Is iconic. I can tell you also, in terms of television as a kid, probably the scariest thing I remember on this show is right there. This thing right here. That's the zombie episode. And God, the tension. There's two, but one's on the TV movie. But this one is in the episode from the series, and this is the one that this is when we still didn't quite fully have our concept of zombies that we have now. So it was working with the Haitian zombie idea, and that was one of the things I really find cool in the Night Stalker TV series, is how they dug into different culture to find these different kinds of monsters and stuff. And in this one, it's Haitian voodoo. And so they're bringing these people back to life. And there's this point where this character there is, been zombified, and it brings them back to life and kills people and all that. And then he goes back and goes to sleep. Then he becomes where he, in a position where Kolchak can take him out. If he can do the right voodoo, he can take him out. And one of those, which you can see in the picture there, is he's got to track him down, which is into like a junkyard where he's inside a car and he's sleeping. And Kolchak's got to pour salt into his mouth. This is without waking him up, and then sew his lips shut without waking him up. And man, the tension is so high, and then when of course the eyes open up while he's in there, is like, Kolchak. And again, one of those great moments where Kolchak just freaks out, like a normal person would in that kind of situation. Just like in the Night Stalker TV movie, when he's hiding in the room, and the vampire comes in, there's such a heightened sense of tension. We've all kind of, even if it's vicarious, have had that sense of just hiding, and you're terrified that person's going to find you, and there's that point where the tension overcomes Kolchak, and he just like throws and he goes running out, and we all relate to it. And I think that's just why it connects so well. I don't know if anybody else has anything, but
yeah, definitely. Can you talk?
But in terms of like a cult TV show, I think this is maybe the ultimate cult TV show, because such a limited number of episodes. It came and went, and basically just died on the vine. It was ripe and then just died right out. And how it just kept alive, until now. Everyone kind of is aware of it. They tried to reboot it, I think, in the 90s or early 2000s, and it didn't work because they didn't have
Darren McGavin.
And they tried to, and they changed up the formula. I think
they changed everything but his name.
Yeah, and I think that misses the whole point. If you're going to do it, you need to find somebody who's got the charisma, the everyman charisma of Darren McGavin, and you've got to be consistent with the approach here, But
that was during that era when they were making a lot of those genre shows. They all kind of like riffed off of other shows and things. Like there's that Kolchak episode where he's basically on the love boat. He's like, there's a werewolf or something.
Oh yeah, that's the werewolf episode. Yeah.
I always call that the love boat episode.
Yeah.
Tim, you're a little underwatery sounding. Can you maybe work on a little bit? Whatever you can do.
But that's a definite case of him being a monster magnet. There's discussion about like these famous detectives of literature and television and movies, that they're murder magnets, right? They all, no matter where they go, there's a murder, right? And Kolchak is a monster magnet. Wherever he goes, a monster appears.
He's an occult detective in the grand tradition, but he's a reluctant one.
Right.
You know,
He's not intentionally one. You know,
right? He doesn't
there
go
are
looking
intention.
for it.
That's
Yeah.
right. He's just looking for the truth, and he's willing to go into areas that the police would never look at, because even if he's completely doesn't believe it's real, he's willing to go and at least investigate it.
Yeah, and
You
then
know.
he's stuck with it, like having to dispatch these monsters, and
Hmm.
he just has to try to muster the courage to do it
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
because no
And
one will believe him.
nobody will believe him. Exactly. And
Even
and that's also part of the formula that started to run thin by episode 20, is like they had to always end the episode in such a way that it was still nebulous to
yeah,
everyone but Carl, you know.
right.
And just, it's like there is a
Poor
point where
Carl.
that's going to be exhausting, you know, for someone like him. And it's like it'd be hard to sustain that for too
Yeah,
much
they wouldn't
longer.
do it that way now.
But I wish
They
they
would have
would.
the boss. What's the name of the character? I know Simon Oakland is the
Yeah, it
actor
was Simon Oakland.
Oh, wow.
from
And
Psycho and many other
yeah,
movies.
Yeah.
Vincenzo,
Ubiquitous guy.
that's
Yeah,
it,
you
Vincenzo.
think by nowadays, by the end of the first season, Vincenzo would believe him.
Yeah,
They
most
would alter it
likely.
a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most likely they would wind up having an episode at the end of the first season where Vincenzo himself winds up face to face with something like that, and Carl has to save him. And then then there becomes that little bonding moment like that. Yeah, I could see where they would probably do
TV
something.
wasn't made for long form
Yeah.
storytelling back then, except for soap operas. So
Now,
Yeah.
everything was, everything that happened one week was forgotten the next week. So you kind
exactly.
of had to
Yeah.
fill, and in this case, a conscientious actor who played it this way had to reflect or fill in the gaps of the accretion of experiences of the character.
Yeah.
Like he's playing it like he's been doing this a while. That's not how they're writing it. They're kind of like writing it like each episode. Yeah, here we go, start over. Like Captain Kirk
Yeah.
in A Million Love Affairs. I
Right.
mean, that's not going to fly on today's Star
Right.
Trek.
It's and that's why, yeah, modern day episodic storytelling, we see like, for an example, Strange New Worlds, how they approach it to be
Yeah.
episodic from one to the other, but there's still threads of
Yeah.
character growth and character bits that stay woven together, but you can still be episodic, Planet of the Week basically kind of situations. And
Yeah.
so yes, I think I mean, I'm probably different than the fandom out there for Night Stalker. I think it's prime for a continuation or a remake or whatever, but I really just think they need to not try to reimagine the whole thing. They need to just kind of do it. Just take it and run
No,
with
they
what you've
need
already
to.
got. The only
Right.
thing you need to change is a little bit more of um through lines narrative
It needs an arc.
to connect it. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
nobody cares about that kind of, except for network sitcom lovers. No one cares about these disposable episode formulas
Right.
anymore. Because look how
Ideally,
well cable's doing with the long form.
the thing that would connect would be that the vampire from the original Night Stalker, and
Sure.
that would be a way to connect it. It's like whatever the connections are, and I think there was it's been at least a year or 2 years since I watched those episodes again. I believe there's like a follow-up, like with that character's daughter or something in a later episode.
Oh, I didn't
So then,
realize it.
and I think, yeah, you could pick up on that kind of thing. And
Gianna
use that,
Scorzini, and the thing, I
because
don't know if you,
he's like one of the last of those types of vampires that are just
yeah,
monsters,
yeah. And I like the Night Strangler character, Richard Malcolm. I thought Richard Anderson did an incredible job, or Malcolm
yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, that's
And
an underrated movie, I think, nowadays.
In
but
some
it's
ways, I like
very
it better
interesting.
than the first one. I
It's
don't
very
know. It's hard to
interesting
say.
with that whole underground city and
Yeah.
Which
battle.
existed.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
very fascinating, and I think could be explored further. Yeah.
And the first one is really like well done if they were going to do a one and done, because it's like by the end he's got nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think he has a girlfriend maybe, and then Simon Oakland gets fired too.
Right.
But
Exactly. So that's what I mean. It's like Vincenzo's in one place in the first movies, in a different place in the second movies, and third place by the TV series, and he's drug Carl around in all of them, or he has allowed Carl to get there.
where do
you
they
know.
start out? Okay, so second movie they're in Seattle. Where are they in The Night Stalker, the first movie?
The first one is in Vegas,
And then Chicago is the series.
and then Chicago is the series. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, it was Los Angeles backdrop, but Chicago set shots. They did a bunch of B-roll shots of him pulling up to buildings in Chicago and getting out and running out of them, or popping into his car and things. And they would use those to intersperse between different shots. But basically, it was Los Angeles, but it's supposed to be Chicago.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Richard Matheson wrote those first two movies, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you can verify this. If I recall correctly, the first movie was kind of like an unintentional hit, like
Yeah. There's no way they knew that was going to happen
because of the weather. People were rained in. I don't know, something weather, and everybody stayed home and watched that.
But all I know is that the ratings were incredible.
Huge.
They had never had a TV movie hit like that. And so, yeah, of course, the network says we got to do more with that. And Night Strangler was a pretty good hit, enough to justify trying the series out.
I loved that show. Any other fans here have anything to share before we move forward?
Well, I was just saying, I'm a fan as well. I came into that show pretty late. It wasn't on TV when I was a kid, but I ended up figuring out. I just think it hits all the right buttons. I'm kind of a monster kid at heart, but I didn't grow up in that era. But I really connect to a lot of that genre stuff in the 60s and 70s. So I feel it's really successful, for those reasons. And actually, one of the reasons I don't think it's worth rebooting unless they can really nail the period right and the tone correct, because even if they did a reboot and they said it in the 70s, a lot of stuff that's made period nowadays just doesn't feel authentically like it's part of that. That era. If that makes any
Has
sense.
to be a really good director, and that's what they're doing.
Well, that's a good tip towards my second series I'm going to talk about too, which is also the same time period, but is a modern show.
I'm excited.
Oh wow! And funny enough, yours kind of ties into mine a little bit.
We can segue into the swinging 70s further with Tim.
More for the time stuff. So in the respect of what you were talking about, the show that I kind of went back and forth with picking different shows, and I ultimately settled on this one, which is Night Gallery, which is a Rob Serling.
Night Gallery. I love Night Gallery.
Night Gallery is fantastic, and I'm actually going to declare that I probably like it slightly more than the Twilight Zone. I like the. Well, here's the thing. I like the Twilight Zone.
It definitely has more of an edge, but then again, that benefited from the influence of the Twilight Zone.
It also has the benefit of it just being the 70s. The 70s is a little bit
more permissive.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Twilight Zone is absolutely amazing and iconic, but Night Gallery has a lot of bite to it. I think it's a much more cynical, TV show. There's a lot of sentimental Twilight Zone episodes, and that doesn't really happen in Night Gallery. Although later on in the series, they started doing little vignettes that were like comedic.
Probably because Earl Hamner wasn't writing for Night Gallery. He wrote some of the more sentimental ones for the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and Night Gallery also had writers like Richard Matheson, who you had referenced with KOLCHAK.
Yeah, of course. And
ultimately, it doesn't. For those who don't know what it doesn't have like a through line plot to it. It's basically an anthology series. Usually an episode covers about like 2 or 3, depending on what it is. I know like the original TV pilot movie or whatever, I think is like one big long, almost movie pretty much for the most part, without having the little interspersed, like, little intercuts with Rod Serling and a lot of these kind of things. But, anthology nowadays, that's something they really can't get right. Yeah. And I think Night Gallery is one of the few anthology horror things that I think just the quality across the board is incredibly consistent. Part of that is the writers, part of that is just the overall look. I mean, Thursday, they do the episode of Pickman's Model based on the H.P. Lovecraft story. Some of the stories are original and some of them are, adaptations.
Yeah.
And the way that the monsters depicted for Pickman's Model, I'm sure that audiences nowadays would say, okay, it's kind of hokey. It's like a man in a monster suit. But something about that imagery is just so authentic and it's surreal in a way that a lot of the special effects for all of the advances that we have now can't really pull that off in some, in some respects. I think that's really the charm of Night Gallery, is that what limited technology or budget or whatever that they had access to, I think it makes the show all the more surreal. And there's a lot of stars that worked on the show as well. You had Victor Buono, who was from Batman, was on it at one point. Leslie Nielsen was on it. I mean,
Anthony
basically
Perkins.
Anthony Perkins was on. I think, was Joe Collins on? I can't remember.
Joan Collins is on one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And they had even bigger names too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They had some Academy Award winners, like Joel Grey is in one of the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everybody. I mean, with a cast like that, I mean, how can you not have consistency? I mean, that's really what it is. I don't think that there's a bad episode in the bunch of those. What's also interesting is, the Twilight Zone kind of shifted how long the episodes were. They started as 30 minutes and then they went to like 45 minutes to an hour. Night Gallery pretty much stayed at like 45 minutes an hour through the whole 3 seasons of its run. And you don't feel like you're wasting time. It's very economical in terms of how they paced it and how they filmed it. So, and again, that's a show like Kolchak that I was late into becoming a fan of. But once I did, I was feeling like, how did I miss this? It's just something about it is brilliant. And the reason it's called Night Gallery is kind of the wraparound segments always have Rod Serling, kind of this art gallery of nightmares that's somewhere in limbo. He kind of introduces it Twilight Zone style, and each of the episodes have a painting that corresponds with it. And like I said, I mean, everything about it's surreal. The paintings are surreal. The opening credits are really surreal. And I mean, it is a pretty successfully scary show. But I think because of the period, it has a lot of the same vibes as Kolchak and Night Stalker.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think both of them are reflective of the I don't know, the distrust and cynicism that was just rising up of the Watergate era.
Well, that's why horror films in the 70s have authenticity, because it's Vietnam, it's Watergate, it's questioning religion and a lot of establishment and that kind of thing. So any of the kind of genre work that comes out of that era really has an authentic voice to it, because it's responding to those kind of anxieties. Now, Night Gallery, because it's TV, it doesn't get too taboo, but it does kind of go on the cusp of that a little bit. And this was the golden age of a lot of horror television miniseries and TV movies, and of course the 70s. Some of the greatest horror films ever made came out in the 1970s. So it kind of was a perfect time for that to come out. I think, unlike some of the cult shows that we might reference today, I think more people probably remember what Night Gallery is than don't remember what Night Gallery is, but it never quite had the cultural phenomenon of like the Twilight Zone had.
Yeah.
No.
But it did last for a while. It was pretty consistent in terms of its ratings and in terms of, the popularity. And thanks to Kino Lorber, there's a Blu-ray of it, just like there is of Kolchak and a lot of these other shows.
Oh, Kino Lorber.
Yeah, Kino Lorber doing the Lord's work and
hell yeah,
putting out Kolchak and Night Gallery. So I don't have the Kino Lorber. I don't have the Blu-ray of mine. I'll pretend like I do. Here it is. Wow.
Yeah, great visual aids.
Particular cover. Look at that. Wow, amazing.
So hey, can you clarify something that you may already have, and maybe I had to tend to something show related off show. So what did you explain? You said it was a wraparound. Did you mention that he introduces it like a portrait, and then it's the story is built around that portrait?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you know? And if you don't know, that's fine. But did you happen to know who any of the artists were, or do you know, Keith?
I don't know off the top of my head.
That seems like something that people like us would or should know.
Yeah, it's actually something I've been curious about, because I've wondered, like, where did all the paintings go?
Well, actually, I do partially have an answer for that. So Greg Nicotero, the makeup designer who does Walking Dead and all this stuff, he actually owned a couple of the paintings from Night Gallery.
Wow.
I don't know how many of them he owns, but I know for a fact that he has a few of them. I don't know which ones, but
next time you run into him, ask him who the artists are.
Oh, I was going to. I saw him at Living Dead weekend over this past weekend, and I just didn't. when I left my conversation with him, I said, you know what? I should have asked him about Night Gallery. I didn't want him to say, how do you know that's in my house? Something like
The
that.
other thing is, how many segments, I mean, how many stories were there per episode? Because I
It depends. It's usually about 3. I think
Okay.
eventually it gets to where there's like 2 big stories, and then there's like 1 or 2 like little tiny vignettes that are usually sillier. I mean, they're still hard. They're
Yeah, I was
typically
going to
more.
ask you, because some contemporary and even of the time writers, contemporary now, have
Yeah.
who review Night Gallery online, I've noticed, say they love the show, but that the small, shorter comedic ones are just don't age at all. I don't know. See, I haven't seen them since
I like
45
them.
years, so I can't give an opinion.
For example, like the Leslie Nielsen one is one of my favorites. It's where Leslie Nielsen's the Phantom of the Opera, and he brings Christine into his lair, and he does this whole speech, as the Phantom. And then when she takes his mask off, and then he comes to discover that Christine is wearing a mask too, and she looks like him. And the 2 of them go like, "Oh," and they like embrace each other.
Aw.
And I love that. I think that's brilliant, and that's the tone that goes through a lot of that. But see, great. Night Gallery does that by design, because Night Gallery is basically doing like a grand ball thing. They're doing some black gallows humor to kind of ease the tension until they get into these very serious episodes that deal with all of these different themes and things. So I think that because those segments showed up later on in the show, I definitely think that I definitely think that they're needed. And I don't think that they detract from them at all. I think that they're pretty nice actually.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to the biggest influence on the Twilight Zone, which was also obviously on the Night Gallery, which is something that broke open the whole genre anthology storytelling, defined it for the latter part of the 20th century, which was EC Comics.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote an article and hey, Justin, welcome to the show. This is Justin Cotton,
Hey.
people.
Hello.
Hey, I wrote an article for a magazine years ago called Dark Discoveries, and it actually got published, and it was about the Twilight Zone in comics. So I charted like all the different iterations of it in comics, and one thing I talked about was the connection. Of course, obviously, people cite O. Henry as the ending for Twilight Zone, but O. Henry predates EC. But EC is a direct blueprint of the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits, especially the Twilight Zone. And there have been anecdotes of people who were at some of the early science fiction conventions in the late 60s who have asked both William Gaines and Rod Serling, and they both said, yes, absolutely. Rod Serling, yes, absolutely. William Gaines, it was my biggest influence on doing the show. And William Gaines, yes, obviously, I really influenced Rod Serling. And I thought that was fascinating because I'd been hearing that for years, but then once I research it and I'm hearing like, oh, it's such and such Phil Seuling con, somebody's like, Rod Serling, what did you think about EC Comics? And he's like, hey,
and interestingly enough, I feel like when they tried to do, like for example, when they did the Tales of the Crypt show, even though a lot of people like that show, at least in my generation,
I'm not.
I don't think that. Well, what I was going to say was it doesn't hold a candle.
Not of your generation.
Yeah, but I'm saying it doesn't hold a candle to Night Gallery, and it also isn't really like the DC Comics all that much.
They're really not. It's really all humor and gore, and none of the other many layers.
Yeah, I think Night Gallery is closer to, say, the DC horror books from the 70s than it is the EC books from the 50s.
Also,
that's a good comparison.
The 70s had a lot of pretty good, even like anthology horror movies. There's some really great Amicus ones that came out around that time.
Dead of Night, which Bill reviewed on the show.
Even that Tales from the Crypt movie that they put out, and From Beyond the Grave. And
the Amicus ones are great. Yeah.
Oh, the Amicus ones are amazing.
I think as far as comics go, the bridge between the EC and the DC ones were really the Warren. The black and white, and of course also those influenced directly the Marvel black and white horror ones.
Yeah, well, those DC horror comics, especially in the 70s, really are slept on, and they shouldn't be, because
those covers scared the hell out of me as a kid.
What a fantastic era, I think, of storytelling for them. I think, in fact, the whole kind of horror underbelly of the DC universe is kind of something that really is not as explored as it should be, or isn't cited as being as influential as it probably is. And it just goes to show you, you know, when people kind of poo-poo on comic books nowadays, I mean, back in the day, if you were literary minded, you liked that kind of stuff. I mean, Rod Serling read a lot of different things, and of course he loved, you know, EC Comics. So
Yeah.
I don't think people could be surprised by that.
Well,
but yeah, if you have,
I will give props to Neil Gaiman for
yeah,
canonizing those anthology
Yeah.
oh yeah,
characters into the
Oh, yeah.
Sandman, into the
Oh,
DC
yeah.
universe
That's
proper.
actually one of the best things about his Sandman comics.
It is.
how
It
he
is.
brings a lot of that together. And
Yep.
Night Gallery kind of lives in that same liminal plane as the Twilight Zone. I think you could even argue it kind of is set in the Twilight Zone, for lack of a better term. But that's a whole
That
other
could be
story for
said, yeah.
Well, the Serling is
But,
Serling is definitely more of a horror host in Night Gallery of
Yeah.
that tradition than he was
Yeah.
in Twilight Zone. He's a lot more statesman-like in Twilight Zone
Yeah.
and erudite. And this one he's
Yeah.
a bit more loosened and sinister.
Yeah.
You know,
And
I
he's
mean,
more like the horror hosts on TV. Like, he isn't dressed like the Crypt Keeper or something from the
No,
Vault
no.
of Horror. But he's more like, you know, in Pittsburgh we had like Chili Billy Cardille, and where he was
Yeah.
just kind of a guy who wore a suit, and you know, and that was the presentation. That's kind of what Rod Serling, you know, is basically doing on the show. And it's also weird to see him in color. You know, you're so used to the Twilight Zone in
Right.
black and white.
Mhm.
Here he is in really lush, vivid color, and it's just there's something weird. It's like it's in 3D. It's so it's so strange when you're used to that.
he looks
Seeing him
nice in those 70s outfits, like the smoking
Oh
jacket.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah. You can just tell there's cigarette smoke in that whole Night Gallery.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just, you know, it's just, you just get those vibes. Probably velvet walls and carpeting and all that kind of.
Yeah, you can totally smell him through the TV screen. You
Oh,
know exactly what his aftershave mixed with cigarettes. You know?
In fact, what's funny is that's how every one of the sets in Night Gallery. I mean, they're all set in like nice houses or apartments because most of the characters are kind of the 70s upper middle class
Yeah,
characters.
yeah.
But you know, very 70s chic on that show. A lot of the you know, hideous furniture that back then was elegant, but you look at it now, you're like, oh god, that's kind of terrible. And of course, watching that in the 70s, thinking, how could people afford houses and apartments like
I know.
that's the real scary part of Night Gallery, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
it's a world we'll never see again.
I know. That's the scariest part. But yeah, so for any of the viewers that are watching this, they're Wikipediaing what I'm saying, and they're going, "Yes, you right about Night Gallery? Watch it. It's absolutely recommended. There's no excuse not to watch Night Gallery. And if you have already seen it, watch it again. It's good.
That's right. It does hold
Thank
up.
you, Tim.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're
I'm
gonna
probably gonna be dipping out though in a
Sure.
couple of minutes.
okay. You want to hear? Okay. Well, thank you for talking about Night Gallery.
No
And
problem.
Just give us the high sign when you're on your way out, and
Okay.
we're gonna
So I'm
pass
stuck
it
in the Phantom Zone, so.
when you go into the Phantom Zone. We're gonna segue over to Mr. CF Roberts here for the next show.
Okay.
Before he said, I'm gonna say bye now. I didn't realize how late it was. So,
Okay.
All right.
bye everybody. Do a great
Peace
job,
out.
everyone. You know,
Tip
get out of the Night Gallery.
tip
All
your
right.
waitress.
Yes.
I will. Get your waitress.
Hi, this is Henry Covert, and this has been Deep Images. Hope you enjoyed today's segment, and we will be back soon to continue our discussion on Cult TV. Feel free to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for the ending credits and the beautiful music of Ghost of Day, and thank you for watching.